People at Sage Arroyo Storage and Auction would still be telling the story months later. How two brothers nobody there knew by name arrived with a rubber-banded stack of small bills, kept their heads down while the regulars talked margins, and somehow won the one unit that didn't even look worth winning. Not because it glittered at the threshold. Because it didn't. Because it looked like the kind of tidy disappointment veterans pass without breaking stride. Until the door rolled high and the air felt a notch heavier, like a room that remembers being important. They answered to Calder and Ivo Mendez, sons of a drywall finisher who taught them slow work done right in a valley that prefers fast work done cheap. They didn't come to North Albuquerque looking brave. Calder's good shirt still held the memory of starch. Ivo's legal pad was a field of math that refused to bend. Their number, when they counted and recounted at the kitchen table the night before, was $638, 2 months of skimming tips, selling a welding rig they loved more than it loved them, canceling the only streaming service that made the apartment feel less like waiting. The plan wasn't faith. It was the last tool left when plans withered under rent and radiator repairs. Storage auctions on TV. On the long row of doors, everything is daylight and asphalt and rules that sound simple until you need them to save you. View from the threshold only, no touching, 48 hours to clear what you win or pay the clean-out penalty in cash. The regulars arrived like a small economy. Cargo shorts, headlamps, clipboards, voices pitched at the exact volume of men who intend to be overheard. They drifted toward doors the manager unlocked with a red bolt cutter that threw back reflections like a baited hook. Mattress graveyard. Office detritus. A failed boutique, garment racks, and a poster that had lost the war with Sun. Calder and Ivo watched hands, not boxes. Rosa's rule from some other life in a different story was right. The quiet bitters teach you more than the loud ones. Then came Unit D19. No chrome. No trunks. No perfume of flip me. Just order. 4 ranks of commercial moving crates, rigid, lidded, the rental kind rich neighborhoods love, stacked 3 high in a neat grid. A stripe of color-coded tape ran across each lid like a filing system. Citron for Closet C, indigo for office, a sober gray for archives. Along the back wall, an aluminum shelving unit held 3 Pelican-style cases with latches that belonged in a survey truck, and in the near corner sat a steel strongbox the size of a carry-on, rubber feet scuffed, keypad smudged. No smell of rot. No whiff of mice. Just clean dust and the particular quiet of things put away by someone who cared where they lived. Veterans groaned anyway. Order isn't a photograph, it's homework. Paperwork, someone muttered with the bored authority of experience, already tracking the aisle to the next door. The manager felt the room and floated a number that invited mercy. Silence. He let it fall once. Twice. Ivo felt the tiniest shift in Calder, that family microsignal that had preceded every irreversible decision since childhood, the weight changing in his heels when he knew a framing square was off even if the bubble claimed it was true. Calder raised his paddle as if checking a shoulder. A stranger countered out of habit, then stalled. 2 beats of wind. The gavel's flat kiss on the clipboard. Done. Winning never sounds like a parade in a place like this. It sounds like paper torn from a carbon book and a key sliding across a counter. $586 after fees and tax and a clean-out deposit that felt like a dare. On paper, they had money left. In the blood, they did not. There's a particular silence when a crowd moves on and leaves you alone with what you bought. Calder stood in it, hands on hips, letting the first flash of regret roll through and pass like weather. They didn't celebrate. Men who have watched good luck snatched back learned to handle it with 2 hands and a closed mouth. Ivo folded open his legal pad and sketched a quick grid of the interior like he'd seen warehouse people do, penciling numbers on each crate's taped stripes so they could replace lids in the exact order they found them. Calder cleared a staging lane just wide enough to move a crate without scraping plastic. Even in a gamble, discipline is leverage. The first indigo office lid clicked free and told on the previous owner in 4 seconds. Not chaos. Not hoard. Deliberate life. Banker boxes within the crate, each labeled in the same tidy script. Vendor agreements Q, Z, 1989 to 94 receipts, correspondence, personal 2 of 3. Not the scentless cheer of staged minimalism, the sober perfume of eucalyptus file folders and someone who paid retainers on time. The gray archives crate held rolled tubes, maps in mylar sleeves with museum board collars, barcodes printed along margins, a municipal seal from a department in Santa Fe that said GIS in a font that didn't try to be liked. The citron closet crates offered immaculate evidence of money measured in tailoring and restraint. Cedar blocks, breathable garment bags folded, not wadded, a shoe tree in every leather Oxford. Money lived here, yes, but older money, the kind that buys better hinges and then forgets them. Their father used to say you learn a person faster by the way they store screws than by the stories they tell. The screws here were in labeled pill bottles inside a divided tray, the tray inside a latch tote, the tote inside a crate that had been strapped for transport even though it had traveled only across a town that could be crossed by an impatient teenager in 20 minutes. Halfway through the second row, the rhythm broke. Indigo again. But when Calder lifted, the lid resisted as if the crate had been taped, untapped, and taped again with different hands. The film of dust on the lid didn't match the dust along the lip. He eased it up anyway. Inside, more file boxes, one stamped credenza, top. Beneath that, a flat, canvas-wrapped rectangle the exact color of dust, stitched at the seam, a wax seal cracked and repressed. It sat like a secret pretending to be packaging. Calder didn't touch it. Instead, he slid a banker box toward the lip, let a few folders yaw, performed the tired shrug of a man who just bought paper and regret. Acting ordinary is also a tool. They worked the visible stacks another hour, swapping anything plainly resellable, clean small appliances, a barely used Dyson head, 2 men's overcoats whose lining whispered money, into the truck. Routine helps when your pulse wants to telegraph new facts to strangers. Only when the neighboring aisle had emptied did they return to the canvas bundle. Whatever lay inside hadn't been designed to please the threshold. The fabric was heavy, water-resistant, the stitching neat. Ivo slid a box cutter along the old thread with a reverence that looked like prayer at a distance and like restraint up close. Inside, an oilskin folio, edges burnished by fingers that turned pages carefully, not quickly. The folio's flap lifted to paper older than the unit but younger than legend, onion skin sheets interleaved with thin drafting vellum, each host to a printed survey overlay and a faint, annotated hand. Not a pirate's map. A professional's palimpsest. The header stamp read, Territorial Survey, 1911, Rio Grande Diversion Contingency. In the margins, a pen that preferred neatness to flourish noted abandoned spur lines, private irrigation rights, and in 3 places the same penciled mark, a small 5-point star and the faintest word beside it, cash. The air clicked. Not because treasure had revealed itself. Because intent had. Whoever rented 19 hadn't been a dreamer filling tubs with someday sells. They'd been a cataloger, a maker of patience, a keeper of context. And people like that don't buy strong boxes to hide birthday cards. They closed the folio. They did not open the strongbox. Safes are patient, curiosity should match them. Ivo photographed the folio's cover, the seal, the onion skin watermark, and the first page with the star while the lid still shaded the crate's lip. Calder replaced everything he'd moved in the order they had found it because the simplest way to keep your story is to make sure the other person's story remains intact. Outside the unit, the day had folded into the soft exhaust of late afternoon. They lowered the door, added their padlock beside the manager's temporary hasp, and rolled their dolly back to the truck with theatrical frustration for anyone who might be practicing boredom within earshot. The manager gave them the same friendly neutral nod he gave men who'd overpaid for furniture all morning. Calder nodded back with the same undecidable face he used when a building inspector asked, "You boys been here long?" Only in the apartment did the tremor they'd been holding show at the edges. Their kitchen table, second-hand oak, ringed with the ghosts of old coffee, turned into a field lab. Clean towel. Legal pad columns for category, condition, notes, possible outlet. Phone camera. A cheap jeweler's loupe Ivo had bought long ago for no good reason that suddenly felt prophetic. Calder opened the oilskin with deliberate hands, slid one onion skin sheet free, then another. The overlay system revealed itself. a 1911 base map of the river's planned diversions, a 1926 update for a rail consortium, a 1947 flood study with penciled amendments, and finally, a 1973 private addendum noting the decommissioning of a warehouse spur that once served a munitions contractor east of the foothills. In the lower right of that last page, the faint star again, and beside it, something not quite a coordinate and not quite a word, -3 from milepost, under platform West Bay. It wasn't just valuable. It was actionable. Not a fantasy X on a parchment. A working person's memory, left legibly for someone who knew what a milepost was and where platforms grow old. They let the folio breathe on the table while they inventoried what could pay bills immediately. 2 charcoal suits cut for a man who had never pretended to be younger than he was. The maker's label inside spoke in silver thread. A small herd of ties with hand slips in the back seam, the kind of detail the internet smiled upon. A pair of wingtips whose leather would take a shine like a mirror in 3 minutes. The strongbox sat in the corner near the bookshelf as if it had always been there, like a short guest waiting for an introduction. When the apartment got quiet enough to feel like thinking instead of reacting, they did what their father would have done when a wall told a different story than the plans. They wrote, D19 proved, disciplined owner, not flipper. Find chain of custody. Identify owner by handwriting before moving items. Safe, no action until plan. They listed the outlets that would actually respect a thing, consignment shops that ensured what they handled, auction houses that spelled provenance without guessing, a museum registrar whose phone number they found buried on a page that most people never clicked. In the last column, under risk, Ivo wrote what neither wanted to speak. If someone wanted this kept quiet, they will not have stopped caring. Before bed, they replaced the folio in the oilskin in the canvas back into the indigo crate. The lock went through the latch with the sound of a decision taken and owned. For the first time in months, they slept without setting an alarm for the worry that rides up at 3 a.m. and demands you rehearse your failures. They woke before sunrise to the softer demand of a plan. The unit, when they rolled the door next morning, smelled the way all rooms smell the day you decide to change your life. Exactly the same, only charged. Calder rigged a work light. Ivo laid out painter's tape numbers on crate lids so even a panic could be put back in original order. They opened the Pelican-style cases at the back and found exactly what their gut had forecast the moment they saw the color codes. Survey gear. A Brunton compass older than both of them but maintained like a priest's chalice. A folding plum with a nick that had been polished smooth rather than ignored. A tube with rolled plat maps, blue lines on mylar, the bureaucratic poetry of bearings and offsets and distances that aren't distances until a boot counts them. They didn't dig for the dramatic. They built the context that would keep the dramatic from being ripped out of their hands the minute it went public. They photographed every crate before moving a single object. They kept a chain of custody log even though there was no chain, no custody beyond a key and a thin rental agreement that said Unit D19 had changed hands lawfully under Rule 6.13 of Sage Arroyo's regulations. They wrote a note to themselves that sounded like a prayer in blue ballpoint. Document before decide. Decide before disclose. Only then did they address the strongbox. Safes reward patience, and this one had lived under patience for a long time. The keypad was worn but not abused. The brand was the sort a careful person buys after reading long reviews written by men who like to be right. The override key slot was covered by a factory plate. They took 5 photos: lock face, serial, battery compartment, hinge condition, feet. They did not try 4 zeros or someone's birthday. They carried it, 2 hands, tight to the chest, out to the truck, strapped it into the back seat like a child the world had no right to meet yet, and drove it not to a strip mall shop with neon but to a quiet locksmith near the tracks whose Yelp reviews were written in the grammar of people who wanted to stop strangers from finding him. The locksmith, an older man whose hands looked like they remembered type bars and pocket watches, didn't want the story and didn't sell mystique. He wanted the model number. He wanted to know whether there was a second lock hidden beneath the trim. He wanted to be left alone for 40 minutes to listen. When he finally set the box back on the counter, he didn't open it. He slid it forward with 2 fingers as if pushing a chess piece into a new square only he could see. When you open it, he said, photograph it before you breathe. It was the kind of advice that pretends to be about the next 5 minutes and turns out to be about the next 5 months. They didn't open it there. They brought it home and set it on the kitchen table that had already become a ledger of small urgencies and large risks. Calder's fingertips rested on the latch like a man taking a pulse. Ivo angled the phone so the lens would hold the first truth, not the second. The keypad's light blinked once, a soft eye waking. The mechanism released with a sound small enough to be unremarkable and big enough to change the air. The lid lifted. Not money. Not watches. Not a pistol that would steer the story toward panic. A bundle of documents wrapped in blue ribbon, the kind of ribbon clerks used to love, the knot tied by someone who believed knots were agreements. On top, a dried courthouse stamp flaked but legible. Beneath, a leather wallet-style case with a monogram so old-fashioned it felt like a character from a play. The ribbon came away clean. The first page under it didn't shout. It certified, a notarized packet acknowledging mineral rights assignments recorded and transferred, not to a corporation, but to a private trust formed in 1973, one line down the page naming the very parcel the 1973 map addendum referenced. Alongside it, a small velvet envelope that did not behave like paper when it moved. Inside, 3 Spanish colonial 8 reals pieces, not a dozen, not a dragon's hoard, their edges worn to a soft argument with light. There would be time later for museums and juried words and letters that turned risk into sanctioned work. For now, the truth sat simply, they hadn't bought trash. They had bought a thread in a story that had been kept taut across a century by a careful stranger. And they had the kind of evidence that doesn't dazzle first, it anchors. Calder closed the safe as gently as if it were sleeping. Ivo entered the line on their log that would separate this day from the ones before. D19, archival packet, trust papers, 3 reals, survey overlays with cash, marks, gear. He didn't write treasure. He didn't write rich. He wrote what would matter in rooms where carpet absorbed voices and pens decided futures. Provenance in progress. Outside, late light washed the Sandia crest pink the way it does when the desert chooses to be beautiful without being kind. The brothers stood in that thin, honest quiet that comes after you've stepped over a line you can't cross back. Tomorrow would be paperwork and questions, and the small, necessary insults of people who like to say, "You boys." Tonight, a locked box sitting on a modest table had moved them from need into custody. They had bought a door for $586. What waited behind it wasn't luck anymore. It was responsibility. And that was heavier than iron in a way that made both men stand a little straighter. For 2 long days, Calder and Ivo treated the storage unit as if it were a library from another century. They didn't rush or speculate. Instead, they worked with quiet precision. Each morning, the metal door rolled open with a groan, and the brothers stepped into the warm, still air inside. Every box was photographed, every label recorded, every piece returned exactly as they had found it. They were no longer sorting through junk. They were reading a life that had been carefully organized and then forgotten. Among the papers from the old safe, one name appeared again and again, Elias Moreland. His signature, written in a firm and tidy hand, matched the initials embossed on a worn leather folder. A little research later confirmed that Moreland had been a surveyor for the state of New Mexico, a man who had spent his career mapping rivers, mining claims, and underground channels. He had died quietly in the late 1970s, leaving no children and no one to inherit his files. But somehow, his work had survived, passed down to Harold Morrison, the geologist who later rented this same unit. The discovery gave their find new meaning. What they had uncovered wasn't a random collection of objects, it was the legacy of 2 men separated by time but joined by curiosity. Both had spent their lives studying the land, and both had hidden the results of that work rather than publish them. Perhaps what they found had been too valuable, or too dangerous, to share. Late one evening, the brothers spread the old maps across their kitchen table, pressing the corners flat under coffee mugs. The pages were fragile, but the ink was still strong, black lines cutting through the faded paper like veins. The markings didn't look like normal survey work. There were strange notations written in Spanish and Latin, faint symbols that repeated across different maps, and several hand-drawn crosses that seemed to mark locations. One note, written near the corner of a page, caught Ivo's attention. It said, "Transfer complete. See Morrison file." The name connected the dots. Morrison had inherited these papers from Moreland, continued his research, and likely used this very unit as his own private archive. What he had discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, was now sitting in their hands. Over the next few nights, Calder and Ivo began to piece the puzzle together. They found coordinates that led to an empty stretch of desert east of the Sandia Mountains. On the county's online map, the area was marked as Inactive Trust Property EM. The notation matched the initials of Elias Moreland. The site was public land now, a forgotten corner between two modern highways. Still, it called to them like a question that had waited too long for an answer. At sunrise, they drove out there in their old truck, the wind carrying dust across the road like smoke. The landscape was silent except for the low hum of insects and the occasional sound of gravel under their tires. When they finally reached the coordinates, they found nothing but a flat piece of concrete half buried in the sand. It was cracked, stained by rust, and looked like the foundation of something that had been abandoned decades ago. But near one corner, Calder noticed something unusual, a metal handle, corroded but intact, set into the concrete. Together they cleared away the dirt until a narrow hatch appeared, sealed but not locked. The brothers exchanged a look that mixed caution and excitement. Calder pulled the handle, and the hatch lifted with a long, dry creak. The air that escaped was heavy with the scent of earth and time. Ivo shined his flashlight into the opening. Inside, stacked neatly like sleeping soldiers, were several metal cylinders, each marked with black ink. Core samples, Survey 3, Silver Vein. The handwriting matched the notes from the Moreland maps. These weren't just random samples. They were geological evidence, carefully catalogued. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The quiet inside the desert hollow felt sacred, almost too still to disturb. Finally, Calder whispered, he wasn't chasing a myth. He found something real. They didn't open the canisters. Instead, they documented everything. The markings, the placement, the measurements. They photographed the hatch from every angle, closed it again, and brushed the sand back into place. Then they drove home in silence, each lost in thought. That night, they compared the serial numbers from the canisters with entries in Morrison's old notebook. 6 of the numbers matched exactly. Next to one of them, Morrison had written a short note, Eagle's Mark, unverified. The phrase was strange and poetic, but when Ivo searched the term online, it began to make sense. During the 18th century, the Spanish crown used an insignia known as El Águila del Imperio, the imperial eagle, to mark silver shipments that had been mined and taxed by the royal authority. If the samples carried that same mark, it meant that the site they had just found might be part of an old Spanish mining cache lost during the colonial period. The thought was thrilling but also dangerous. People had died chasing stories like that. Calder closed the notebook slowly, his face unreadable. Whatever this is, he said, it's not just ours anymore. Before they went to bed, he wrote one line in their new logbook, we are the third in line, Moreland, Morrison, and now us. Let's not be the last. The next morning, an envelope appeared in their mailbox with no return address. Inside was a faded newspaper clipping. The headline read, Local geologist missing in the Superstition foothills. The photo showed Harold Morrison standing beside a truck loaded with survey gear. Someone had circled the date in red ink, 5 years earlier. Beneath the article was a plain white business card embossed with the words Desert Recovery Group, Cultural Asset Services. There was no address, only a phone number. The brothers exchanged a long look, neither needing to say what they both felt. Someone else knew about this story, and whoever had sent that card was still watching. That night, they didn't sleep much. They packed the coins, the papers, and Morrison's notebook into a safety deposit box at a bank downtown. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were listening. When they turned off the lights, the quiet hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than ever. Somewhere out there, a story that had started in the 1700s had found its way into their lives, and it wasn't finished yet. By the time dawn came, Calder was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of cold coffee. The desert outside was still dark, but he could see the first glow on the horizon. The line he had written the night before echoed in his head like a warning. They were not the first to follow the trail, but they might be the first to understand how deep it went. For a few days, Calder and Ivo tried to return to normal life. They went to work, bought groceries, paid bills, and pretended the world hadn't changed. Yet every night, after the neighborhood went quiet, they found themselves back at the kitchen table, studying the old maps and notes like detectives who couldn't stop chasing the same question. Each page, each drawing, each symbol seemed to pull them closer to something larger than either of them could define. The more they read, the clearer it became that both Elias Morland and Harold Morrison had been tracking the same thing. Morrison's handwriting filled the margins of several maps with comments like, "Confirmed trace," "Possible site," and, most curiously, "Eagle's shadow appears at noon." Those words repeated across multiple pages, usually next to coordinates or elevation marks. Ivo guessed it referred to a natural landmark, maybe a rock formation shaped like an eagle. But Calder thought it sounded more like a code, a phrase used by men who wanted to hide their discoveries in plain sight. They decided to follow the clues. On a Saturday morning, before the sun had fully risen, the brothers packed their truck with water, flashlights, and the photocopied maps. They told no one where they were going. The highway east of Albuquerque was quiet, just the sound of tires against cracked asphalt and the occasional gust of wind carrying desert sand. As they drove, the conversation faded, replaced by a shared understanding that they were leaving the comfort of certainty behind them. After 3 hours, the landscape began to change. The flat desert gave way to low cliffs and dry ravines that carved through the land like wrinkles on an old face. They stopped near a narrow canyon, one that matched the rough sketch on Morrison's map. The coordinates led them to a ridge overlooking a deep cut in the earth. When they stepped out of the truck, the silence felt heavy, as if even the wind had decided to hold its breath. Calder studied the canyon wall through binoculars. At first, he saw only rock, layers of red and brown sandstone cracked by centuries of weather. Then, as the sun rose higher, something shifted. The light fell across the cliff in such a way that the shadows formed the clear outline of an eagle with its wings spread wide. It lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough to confirm the phrase that had haunted Morrison's notes. "The eagle's shadow," Calder whispered. They climbed down carefully, following a narrow path that wound through the stones. At the base of the canyon, the air was cooler, and small fragments of quartz glittered in the dust. Near the center, hidden behind a cluster of rocks, they found a narrow opening. It was small, almost invisible unless you were standing in the right spot at the right time of day. The passage inside was only a few feet high, carved straight into the rock. It looked too smooth to be natural. Ivo crouched, shining the flashlight ahead. The beam revealed a short tunnel leading into a chamber the size of a small room. The walls were covered in faint marks, not carvings but chisel lines, the unmistakable signature of human hands. Inside the chamber, they found no gold, no jewels, and no glittering piles of treasure. Instead, there were rows of heavy, dull objects stacked against the back wall. Calder brushed away the dust and felt the cold metal beneath his fingers. They were ingots, each one the size of a brick, sealed with darkened wax and stamped with the same eagle insignia Morrison had mentioned. The markings were worn but still visible, the seal of the Spanish crown from the mid-1700s. The brothers stared in silence, overwhelmed by what they were seeing. It was real. Every rumor, every fragment of the story, every strange mark on those maps, all of it had led to this. They weren't holding a legend. They were standing inside it. And right here, before the tension builds too much, let's pause for a second. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel because this mystery only gets deeper from here. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Back inside the chamber, Ivo crouched beside an old wooden box wedged into a corner. Its lid was fragile but intact. When he opened it, the air filled with the dry scent of parchment and age. Inside were folded papers sealed with wax and tied with thin cord. Calder gently unfolded one. The handwriting was elegant and precise, written in Spanish. Though he couldn't translate every word, a few phrases stood out clearly. Year of our Lord 1751, royal silver, and buried to prevent capture by raiders. It was a record, a written account of the treasure's burial. The signature at the bottom had long since faded, but the intention was unmistakable. This was not just a stash of metal. It was an official deposit made during a time of conflict, hidden until the Spanish crown could reclaim it, a reclamation that never came. For a while, the brothers didn't move. The quiet was so deep that even their breathing seemed too loud. Calder finally said what both were thinking. "We can't tell anyone about this." "Not yet." Ivo nodded. They both knew the truth of that. Too many stories ended with greed, and too many discoveries were lost the moment they went public. They stayed for another hour, documenting what they could without disturbing anything. When they finally climbed back into the open sunlight, the canyon seemed to breathe again. The shadow of the eagle had already disappeared from the rock wall, as if it were satisfied that someone had finally understood its message. On the drive back, neither spoke much. The discovery had changed something inside them. It wasn't just about history anymore, it was about responsibility. Calder kept replaying one line from Morrison's notes: "Rescue is not removal." He understood now what it meant. Finding something didn't mean taking it. It meant protecting it. That night, they returned to their small apartment with dust still on their boots and the weight of centuries on their minds. They spread Morrison's notebook across the table and added their own notes beside it, carefully describing every detail of what they had seen. When they were done, Calder closed the book and said quietly, "We found it, but it's not ours to keep." Outside, the desert wind moved softly against the windows, carrying with it the dry, ancient scent of the earth. Somewhere out there, hidden again under layers of stone and time, the silver waited, not for thieves or adventurers, but for those willing to tell its story the right way. And as the brothers sat in silence, surrounded by papers and maps, they both felt the same uneasy truth settle in. The story wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm of caution and curiosity. Calder and Ivo spent their mornings at work, their evenings buried in notes, and their nights half awake, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The apartment had grown quieter, not because of peace, but because silence was safer. Every time a car slowed outside their building, they paused mid-sentence and waited for it to pass. What had begun as a discovery now felt like a secret that carried its own gravity, one that pulled everything else in their lives slightly out of orbit. They decided to return to the canyon, not to dig or take, but to understand. At dawn, they drove out under a sky the color of unpolished steel. The desert was vast and indifferent, stretching endlessly in every direction, as if it had already seen men like them come and go. When they reached the ridge above the canyon, the shadow of the eagle was gone, hidden by morning light. The stillness felt heavier this time, as if the land itself was aware of their return. They retraced their path to the narrow entrance and found everything exactly as they'd left it. The stones undisturbed, the sand smooth except for the faint marks of their own boots from before. Inside, the chamber was cooler, the air stale but calm. Calder moved carefully, checking the walls for any sign of disturbance, while Ivo unfolded a small notepad to record what they saw. The ingots sat in the same quiet order, and the old papers remained untouched. But this time, they noticed something they had missed before. A faint engraving on one of the stones near the entrance, the letter I-M, carved deep and deliberate. It could have been centuries old, or it could have been Morrison himself, marking the place for his own return. Either way, it meant they were not imagining the connection. They documented everything again, but now their work carried more weight. Each photograph, each note, each sketch felt like an act of preservation, not possession. They spoke little. The chamber seemed to demand reverence, as though words might disturb the dust of those who had come before. When they emerged into daylight, the wind had picked up, sending thin ribbons of sand swirling through the canyon. The desert was changing, shifting, whispering reminders that nothing buried ever stays that way forever. That evening, Calder noticed a small black SUV parked across from their building. It wasn't there before. The windows were dark and the engine was off, but he could see the faint outline of someone inside, motionless. He didn't tell Ivo immediately. Instead, he closed the curtains and pretended not to notice. By morning, the vehicle was gone. Still, the unease remained, a quiet certainty that they were being watched. They tried to outpace the feeling by focusing on the work. Ivo began organizing the files into digital folders, scanning maps, and photographing every document they had found. Calder took Morrison's old journal to the local library, where he compared the notes to historical records of Spanish mining expeditions. The pieces fit too perfectly to be chance. The shipments, the missing records, the coordinates, all pointed to the same hidden chapter of history that had waited 3 centuries for someone patient enough to read it. Around this time, their story began to spread, not openly, but through whispers. A man at the storage facility mentioned to a friend that the Ortega brothers, or in this version, the Calder brothers, had found something strange. By the next week, the rumor had traveled further than either of them imagined. Offers began appearing in their inbox from anonymous accounts claiming to represent historical investors. Some messages promised money, others simply asked for a meeting. None mentioned the canyon directly, but the timing was too precise to be coincidence. In the middle of all this, they decided to take a small risk, to reach out to a museum registrar they'd read about, someone who handled historical preservation with discretion. Calder drafted a careful email, leaving out details about the silver, mentioning only that they had found Spanish-era documents and wanted advice on proper verification. The reply came faster than expected. The registrar agreed to meet, requesting that they bring photographs, not originals, and assuring them that confidentiality was standard practice. And before we go on, if you've been following this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us keep sharing stories like this one. Also, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We love hearing how far these discoveries reach. When the day of the meeting arrived, Calder went alone. The registrar's office was quiet, filled with the faint smell of old paper and polished wood. The woman he met wasn't what he expected, not distant or academic, but warm and curious, someone who seemed to carry both knowledge and caution in equal measure. She studied the photographs carefully, tracing her fingers over the image of the stamped ingot. "This isn't reproduction work," she said softly. "These markings are consistent with mid-18th century Sonoran refineries. If what you've found is genuine, you're sitting on an important historical site." Calder nodded but said little. The registrar leaned back, thoughtful. "You need to be careful," she added. "Objects like these attract the wrong kind of attention. There are people who don't care about history, only about what they can sell from it." Her tone wasn't dramatic, it was factual, the voice of someone who had seen this story before, only with less fortunate endings. When Calder left, the desert air outside felt sharper, as if the world had tilted again. He sat in his truck for a long moment, thinking about what she had said. Somewhere behind him, he caught a flash of sunlight in a side mirror, a reflection from another vehicle parked half a block away. By the time he looked again, it was gone. That night, Calder told Ivo everything. They decided to move the most sensitive documents, Morrison's notes, the photographs of the ingots, and the Spanish letters, into a safety deposit box at a different bank. They split the keys between them, a simple but necessary gesture of trust. The canyon, the coins, the silver, the centuries, all of it now existed between two people who hadn't asked for the responsibility but refused to abandon it. The next morning, as sunlight spilled through the blinds, Calder woke to a new sound, the faint crackle of paper sliding under their front door. He picked it up without opening it. The envelope was plain, unmarked, and heavy enough to make the air feel colder. Inside, there was no letter, only a single photograph, a grainy image of the canyon wall with the eagle's shadow cast perfectly across it. Written on the back, in neat handwriting, were 3 words: "We found you." The photograph sat on the table for hours before either brother spoke. The edges curled slightly under the weight of their hesitation, as if the picture itself was alive with quiet menace. It was proof that someone else had been to the canyon, or worse, that someone had followed them there. Calder finally slid the photo back into the envelope and sealed it inside Morrison's notebook. He didn't say what both of them knew, the secret was no longer theirs alone. The next few days moved with the slow rhythm of anxiety. They changed routes to work, parked on different streets, and checked the locks twice before sleeping. Sometimes the phone rang once and then stopped. Sometimes a car idled too long at the corner. The ordinary world had begun to look unfamiliar, like a stage where every background actor was watching too closely. Still, they refused to run. Morrison had hidden his truth for decades. They could protect it for a while longer. One afternoon, Calder returned to the museum, not to speak to the registrar but to leave a copy of Morrison's journal and a letter explaining everything they had found. He didn't sign his name, only a note that said, "For history, not for sale." Then he walked out without looking back. That act, small as it was, felt like drawing a line between preservation and survival. When he came home, Ivo was waiting with news. The registrar had contacted them through a secure email, explaining that a federal heritage office had quietly opened an inquiry based on her professional report. She didn't mention their names, but she asked them to confirm whether the coordinates listed in the copied notes were accurate. Calder read the message twice before closing the laptop. "If we answer," he said quietly, "we lose control." Ivo nodded. "And if we don't," he replied, "someone else finds it without us." That night, they talked until the moon slipped behind the horizon. Eventually, the conversation turned from fear to responsibility. They agreed that Morrison's discovery, and now their own, deserved more than secrecy or greed. It belonged to history, to the land itself. The canyon had kept its secret for centuries. It deserved to be treated with care, not conquest. By dawn, the decision was made. They sent one final message to the registrar, confirming the site's existence and granting permission for a protected survey. They asked for anonymity, nothing more. The response came the next morning, a simple thank you and the promise that official protection would follow. There were no headlines, no flashing lights, no sudden fame. Just a quiet sense that something ancient had been lifted from danger into safety. A week later, the same black SUV appeared again, parked further down the street this time. But it didn't stay long. Whoever had been watching must have realized the story had moved beyond reach, out of the shadows and into the hands of people who wouldn't sell it. The brothers never saw the car again. Months passed, and life settled back into a rhythm that almost resembled normal. Calder returned to his repair work. Ivo picked up odd jobs to cover what they had spent. But every so often, a letter arrived, official-looking envelopes bearing seals from state offices and historical societies. The updates were brief but hopeful. Excavation confirmed Spanish artifacts consistent with 1751 records. The site was under federal protection. The name Eagle's Shadow had been officially registered as a historical landmark. They read each one at the same kitchen table where everything had begun, the same table that once held dust, silver, and fear. And if you've followed their journey this far, make sure to like this video and subscribe, not just for stories about hidden treasure, but for stories about courage, honesty, and the quiet kind of legacy that people like Calder and Ivo leave behind. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far these stories travel. As the months turned into a year, the brothers drove back to the canyon one last time. The site was now fenced off, marked with government signs warning against entry. But from the ridge above, the view remained the same. The stretch of desert, the shimmer of heat, the shadowed cut in the earth that had changed everything. At noon, the sun reached its highest point, and once again, the shape of the eagle appeared across the canyon wall. Its wings spread wide in silence, as if blessing the land it had guarded for generations. Calder stood with his hands in his pockets, watching the shadow lengthen. "We did the right thing," he said quietly. Ivo nodded. "We finished what he started." For a moment, neither moved. The wind carried the faint scent of rain from far away, rare, clean, and almost sacred. Back in town, life didn't look any different to anyone else. The same streets, the same storefronts, the same people. But for the brothers, the world had shifted. They had held history in their hands and learned what it meant to let it go. The treasure hadn't made them rich, but it had made them whole, men who had taken something hidden and turned it into truth. That night, Calder placed Morrison's notebook on a shelf beside an old photograph of their father, a quiet symbol of what mattered most. Work done honestly, stories told truthfully, and the understanding that not every discovery belongs to the finder. Outside, the desert slept under a blanket of stars, And somewhere beyond the horizon, the canyon waited, no longer a secret, but a memory, protected and at peace.